Chapter 11, Creating Opportunities. Always be prepared to learn new skills. Business development isn't about chasing opportunities. It's about creating the conditions where opportunities chase you. Creating opportunities. Leaving Royal Roads University wasn't easy. I enjoyed the work. I enjoyed the people. But once again, I knew I had reached a crossroads. I had a choice: stay where I was or begin again. Looking back, I've come to realize that some of the greatest opportunities in my life came disguised as uncomfortable changes. Seneca College became one of those opportunities. Leading a major institution. When I became Director of College Services at Seneca College, I stepped into the largest operational portfolios in the Canadian post-secondary education. Seneca was the biggest college in the country. It had more full-time students than the population of my hometown. My responsibility covered 4 cost centers and 5 auxiliary profit centers across 8 campuses. We served approximately 20,000 students and generated roughly $33 million in annual revenue. My division touched almost every part of student life: transportation, security, intercampus mail, 6 retail stores, 14 food service outlets, parking, Eaton Hall Hotel and Conference Center, 2 student residents, and a variety of ancillary businesses. It was a complicated ecosystem, and manage it required more than technical knowledge. It required collaboration, diplomacy, and the ability to build consensus among people with very different interests. Closing a department the right way. Not long after arriving, I faced a challenge that tested those skills. The transportation department, once essential for moving students between campuses, was no longer performing well. Students were increasingly choosing their own transportation. Demand had collapsed. The numbers were clear. The service was no longer viable. But closing a department in a college environment is never simple. It affects people, it affects jobs, and it affects long-standing expectations. So I brought everyone to the table: the student association, the employees union, faculty, and other interested stakeholders. I laid out the data. I invited alternatives. And most importantly, I made sure everyone had an opportunity to be heard. By the end of the meeting, we had reached a unanimous conclusion. The department had to be closed. That experience reinforced a leadership lesson I had first learned in the Navy and refined at the Public Service Appeal Board. People don't have to like the decision if they believe that it was a fair process. That lesson would serve me well for the rest of my career. Now here's a grandpa's signpost that reinforces that concept. It reads, "People don't have to like the decision if they believe the process was fair." Now getting back to the chapter, transforming a division. Over the next 3 years, my team and I delivered revenue improvements of roughly $3 million. We did it by modernizing operations, introducing new businesses, and rethinking old ones. We launched a new food service outlet, a student-focused convenience store, an ATM business, and several advertising initiatives. Together, these new revenue streams increased the division's contribution by 60% in just 2 years. But creating opportunities wasn't simply about adding new businesses. Sometimes it meant looking at something that had been done the same way for many years and asking why. We've always done it that way. Parking was a perfect example. For decades, parking attendants had manually collected fees at each lot. It was labor-intensive, it was outdated. So I asked one of the long-serving managers, "Why do we still do it that way?" His answer was familiar: "We've always done it that way." Whenever I hear those words, I know there's probably a better solution waiting to be discovered. Now here is another important Grandpa's signpost. This one reads, "Never be afraid to challenge the status quo." That conversation opened the door to change. The manager introduced me to a friend who operated a small parking business. Together, we modernized parking across all campuses. We introduced automatic gates and payment machines. The result? Approximately $700,000 in annual savings. But something else came from that relationship. A professional relationship we developed would later become valuable to me in my next position. I didn't know it at the time. I was simply trying to solve a parking problem. That's often how relationships work. You build them today without knowing how important they may become tomorrow. Creating another opportunity. We also revitalized the student residence. Instead of using it only for students, we created a hotel and conference operations during the summer months. By shifting our strategy towards summer commercial business, we achieved approximately $1.2 million in growth over 2 years. That's a 144% improvement. That residence was managed by a company specializing in student residents across Canada. I made a point of spending time with the owner whenever he visited the college. I quickly discovered that he was a wealth of knowledge when it came to operating a profitable business. Once again, a relationship was being built, and once again, I had no idea how valuable that relationship would become in the future. The partnership that changed everything. Then came an even bigger opportunity. A private investor committed $10 million to build a destination spa at Eaton Hall, with guaranteed employment opportunities for student graduates. It became one of the most significant ancillary partnerships in the college history. Looking back, I realized that none of these opportunities happened by accident. They came from asking questions, listening to people, being willing to try something different, and building relationships. The hot dog vendor. But perhaps the most memorable example started with something very much smaller, a hot dog stand. The Vice President of Finance and Administration asked me to solve a problem that the President had raised. At the college's main entrance, a man was operating an unsightly portable hot dog booth on the city road allowance. It wasn't college property, and although the vendor was violating a city bylaw, the city had no interest in enforcing it. It was a classic roadblock. It wasn't technically my problem, but it affected the college's image. I needed another way. The conversation that changed everything. The conversation that changed everything. The solution arrived in a place where some of the most important conversations in my career occurred. Not in the boardroom, not in a formal meeting, but while waiting in line for a cup of coffee. I was standing in line at our on-campus Tim Hortons when I struck up a conversation with a newcomer from Afghanistan who was looking for work. He and his wife had operated a small business selling authentic halal sausage before coming to Canada. We had a large Muslim student population, so I asked him a simple question. Would he be interested in opening a small halal food booth on campus? He was thrilled. Within a week, his new booth was up and running. Within 3 months, the illegal vendor had left on his own. But that wasn't the end of the story. The Afghan entrepreneur went on to build a thriving business with multiple halal food stands across the Greater Toronto area. And every year since, he has phoned me on my birthday, on Father's Day, and every Christmas, even though he doesn't celebrate Christmas himself. A simple conversation in a coffee line became a relationship that lasted 2 decades. Now here is an important Grandpa's signpost. It reads, "Never underestimate the opportunity hidden inside an ordinary conversation." As I reflect on this chapter, I realized my time at Seneca College reinforced a lesson that had followed me throughout my career. Success is never achieved alone. Every improvement, every new business, every new partnership was built on the willingness of people to innovate, collaborate, and challenge old assumptions. Seneca was a place where scale met opportunity, and relationships with students, staff, partners, and even strangers became the foundation for a lasting change. Looking back, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't started that conversation while waiting for coffee. Life is full of moments that seem ordinary at the time. Sometimes they become the moments that change everything. Time for a letter to my granddaughter. Dear Marlies, as you grow older, you'll discover that opportunities don't always arrive with a sign announcing themselves. Sometimes they look like problems. Sometimes they look like change. Sometimes they're simply the person standing beside you while you wait for a cup of coffee. One conversation can lead to a lifelong friendship. One idea can grow into a successful business. One decision can completely change the direction of your life. That's why I hope you will always stay curious about people. Talk to them. Listen to their stories. Most importantly, ask questions. You never know where a simple conversation might lead. Sometimes the greatest opportunities in life begin with nothing more than saying hello. With love, Grandpa. My years at Seneca had taught me that opportunities could be created, but I was about to discover something even more powerful. The relationships that I had built at Seneca were going to follow me into my next chapter, and they were going to help me solve problems I couldn't yet imagine. The lesson would become especially important when I accepted a position as the Vice President of Finance and Administration at Cambrian College. I was walking into a college that was struggling financially, and I would soon discover that some of the solutions were already waiting for me. I simply had to recognize the people who could help me find them. That's where Chapter 12 begins.